Hello everyone. So in this video, I'm going to take you through a lab exercise. So the lab what we are going to perform today is Azure Migrate. Azure Migrate is a free tool offered by Microsoft which you can use to migrate your on-prem servers, databases, apps, etc. to Azure. So for in this lab, we are going to use a fictitious company called Smart Hotel. And what you are seeing on the screen right now is the on-prem environment of that smart hotel. The smart hotel hosts their applications and their databases on-prem on a Hyper-V host. And they have a couple of web server, an SQL backend database, and a Ubuntu server which they are using as a web application firewall. All of this is hosted on-prem. So we are going to lift and shift all of these workload, including the Linux machine, to Azure. So there are three parts to this lab exercises. The first part is what this environment, we are going to replicate that in Azure. So I don't have an on-prem environment, so we're going to deploy a template which is going to be deployed in a Hyper-V environment. So all of these virtual machines are going to be in Azure running in a Hyper-V nested environment. So that's the first part. In the second part of the lab, what we are going to do is we are going to first do this on-prem environments discovery and assessment. We are going to use the same tool called Azure Migrate, which will allow us to first discover. Discovery is nothing but we are going to go through this environment to find out what are the dependencies on these servers, what sort of a compute we are going to use once we move into the Azure, and I'm going to show you various settings you can learn on the discovery and assessment phase. The first task we are going to perform is to move these three servers, the Ubuntu Linux machine and the Web App 1 and the Web App 2 virtual machine to Azure using the Azure Migrate tool. So that's the second stage. The third stage is migrating the database to Azure. So even though we moved the virtual machines as it is, our database is running perfectly fine. But I want to let you know that there are other couple of tools which you can use to migrate the databases to Azure. The couple of tools we are going to see is one is DMS, which is Azure Data Migration Service, which is an inbuilt Azure service which you can use to migrate any sort of database into Azure. The second tool we are going to use is DMA, which is Data Migration Assistant, which we are going to use to move these database server into Azure SQL database, so which is a platform offering. And I really hope you find this video useful. All right, so now let's go and deploy this on-premises environment we talked about and landing zone. First, let's find the deployment template. So I'm going to access the place where I have placed this deployment template JSON, and I'm going to log in with my Azure credentials. So we only need to provide very limited information here. The only thing we need to provide is resource group name. So I'm going to put as Smart Hotel resource group. So I know that by looking into this, it is a resource group. I'm going to keep the region as East US. I'm going to quickly update the password. Rest all of the values, I'm going to keep it as it is, like include the landing zone as true and retaining the landing zone location, and hit on review and create. So the validation is successfully passed. I'm going to hit create. This template will take around 6 to 7 minutes to deploy, and once the template deployment is complete, several additional scripts are executed to bootstrap the lab environment. I need to wait at least 1 hour from the start of the template deployment for the scripts to run. So I'm going to pause the video, let this template deploy completely, and we will come back to the environment later. We will look into the workloads which is deployed into the resource group. All right, it looks like our deployment has completed. Let's go to the subscription and see all the resources we have just deployed. So we had an empty subscription just before. Looks like we have 3 virtual network, public IPs, disk, databases, servers, and application gateway, which was part of the template. Just to reiterate, like I mentioned before, what we are deploying right now is an on-prem environment. Even though it is deploying in Azure, we are creating a typical on-prem environment with a company with some apps running and few databases and couple of virtual machines, things like that. So let's go to the resource group and see all the resources which is deployed. I'm sorting it by type so I can check the services by type. We have disk, network interfaces, network security group, public IP address, and virtual machine as well. So I'm going to select the virtual machine. So our virtual machine is running at the moment. To make sure that the application which is installed and running in the virtual machine is working properly, I'm just copying the public IP address. I'm going to go to another tab and I'm going to call out that server. All right, so now we can see the Smart Hotel application is running. This application is running on a nested VMs within Hyper-V on Smart Hotel host. You don't have to worry about how this is being made and more about the application. It's all about this particular customer have an application now. How are we going to move it? Now let's go and verify the landing zone environment. So I'm going to go back to my home page, click on home. This time click on resource group. So the one which we just now checked is called Smart Hotel Host Resource Group. That's where our application or on-prem environment is running. And Smart Hotel Resource Group is our landing zone environment. Let us check all the resources required for us is being deployed or not. All right, I just sorted by type. So we have an application gateway which is required. We need Bastion and we need SQL Server database and a virtual network. So all of the component which we wanted to deploy via landing zone is been completed as well. All right, so in this lab, you will use Azure Migrate Server Assessment to assess the on-premises environment. So let's go and search for Azure Migrate. So we are going to use Azure Migrate and we are going to use Azure Migrate tools. We're going to deploy the Azure Migrate appliance into our on-premises environment. Then create a migration assessment and we are going to use the dependency tool, which is Azure Migrate Dependency Visualization. So let's get started. So under Azure Migrate, click on Get Started. Within Get Started, you can start with discovering and assessing for your servers and databases, database only, and explore more scenarios. We're going to choose Discover, Assess, and Migrate. We don't have any project at the moment, so we're going to create a new project. Select the subscription. Instead of selecting a existing resource group, I'm going to create a new one and hit OK. Enter a project name. I'm going to name it as Smart Hotel Migration because we are going to move their Smart Hotel on-prem environment into Azure. And I'm going to pick a geography as US. So we can ignore the advanced. I will come and talk about this later. Let's hit create. All right, looks like our deployment is successfully completed. Now we can proceed to the next task. In this task, we are going to deploy the Azure Migrate appliance. For that, under Migration Goals, click on Server, Databases, and Web Apps. And under Assessment Tools, click on Discover. This is where we are choosing the right virtualization platform, whether it is VMware, Hyper-V, or physical, or are these servers residing in AWS, Google, or other clouds, etc. So since our environment is a nested virtualization Hyper-V environment, I'm going to choose Hyper-V. And we are going to give a name for the appliance. I'm going to call it as Smart Hotel Appliance. And the first step is to generate the key. So we need to wait for the key to be generated, and then we are going to copy the Azure Migrate project key to our clipboard. All right, so our project key is being created. I'm just going to copy it to the clipboard just to make sure that I don't accidentally copy it over again. I'm going to keep a notepad to keep a copy of that. All right, now I'm going to go to another tab and we're going to open another Azure portal. This time we are going to connect to our on-prem environment. So I don't want to disrupt whatever we've been doing in the other portal. So this time I'm going to go to Resource Group. All of our on-prem environment is being hosted in Smart Hotel Resource Group host. Within that, we have few workloads. One in particular we are interested is our Hyper-V virtual machine, which is the Smart Hotel host. So I'm going to click on Connect via RDP. Under IP address name, you can either choose the public IP or the DNS name. I'm going to keep this DNS name as it is and click on download RDP file. Click on open the RDP file you just downloaded. Click on connect and provide the username and password and hit OK. Click yes. So this is our on-prem Hyper-V environment. So what I'm going to do right now, I'm going to open the Hyper-V Manager. You can do that by going into Tools, click on Hyper-V Manager. If you expand the Hyper-V Manager, you can see all the servers which I talked about, which is running in the server. We have 4 virtual machines. One is an Ubuntu web application firewall. There is a couple of web servers and a backend SQL database, which is in a turned off state right now. Now let's go back to the Azure portal. If you remember, in the last exercise, what we have done, we created a discovery and we chose that the appliance what we are going to use is a Hyper-V environment, and we created a project key. The next step is to download this VHD. So I'm going to download the VHD now. All right, so now I have downloaded and uploaded the VHD in the on-premises environment. So the next step is to import it. So the first step is to click on Action and select Import Virtual Machine. Click Next. I have copied into Data Disk under Azure Migrate and Azure Migrate Appliance, and simply select the folder. The next step is to click Next. You can see that it is automatically detected the file. So this is the Azure Migrate Appliance we just downloaded from the Azure portal. Click Next. This is a very important step. So you have to select the first option, which is register the virtual machine in place using the existing unique ID, and click Next. So this is where we have to select the network switch. This error is expected because the virtual switch previously used by the Azure Migrate appliance could not be found. So select the drop down, and this time select the Azure Migrate switch or whatever switch you have internally available within your environment, so that it is shared between other hosts in that virtualization space. So click Next and click on Finish. All right, I'm going to right click the Azure Migrate appliance and click on Start. So one thing you need to understand while this is happening is Azure Migrate appliance need access to the internet to upload data to Azure. It also need access to the Hyper-V host. However, it does not need direct access to the application VMs running on the Hyper-V host. To protect the application environment, the Azure Migrate appliance should be deployed to a separate subnet within the Hyper-V. I'm talking about in the real environment rather than in the same subnet as your application. So it looks like our Azure Migrate appliance is booting up. Accept the terms and condition. Provide the password for your administrator and click on Finish. Okay, looks like something. All right, I just put the password again. Click on Finish. I'm going to type in the password one more time. All right, this time it picked up, and click on Connect. Enter the password to log into the appliance. All right, so this is one of the steps I want you to know before in hand. So if you're logging into the Azure Migrate appliance for the first time, don't do anything when you just sign in. Just give the system at least 1 or 2 minutes, because after that, there are a lot of scripts running in the backend on the appliance side. So the browser will open showing the Azure Migrate appliance configuration wizard by default without you doing anything. If it is not launched in like 2 to 3 minutes or so, you can launch this, because on the appliance there is a desktop shortcut anyway. But I would encourage not to double click on this as soon as you log into the appliance, because it will automatically open just like how it did just now. Cool. So agree to the terms and condition. Now it is running the prerequisites check, and first 2 checks will be automatically checked, because the verification for the internet connectivity and time synchronization matches straight away, so it automatically checks. And the next process, it will take time. So click on refresh, because this is where it installed the latest Azure Migrate updates. So hit refresh. If you get this prompt, not all the time, sometimes when you download the appliance will automatically have the latest update. If not, it automatically installs it. So now the system is going for one more test to make sure that everything is in order because it just finished installing the latest update. So while that is happening, I just want to show you, this is where you will put the key which we generated within the Azure Migrate appliance. So let me quickly show you while this is happening. This is the appliance page where we downloaded. This is the key we downloaded. So I'm just gonna copy it one more time and hope that this finished in time. No, it is taking a little more time than I expected. All right, so all the prerequisites are being checked. So I'm gonna paste the key here and click on login. All right, so this is asking us to copy this code, and because we are going to use this code to sign into Azure, so I'm going to copy the code again, paste that code back and click next. So this is where you will have to provide your Azure credentials. So provide the username, provide the password and sign in. All right, click continue. So now it has been authenticated against our Azure account. Now we can safely close this window. So if we go back to the appliance, if you scroll down, you can see that it is now initiating appliance registration. This can take up to 10 minutes to complete. All right, so now our appliance has been successfully registered. Now scroll down and this time click on add credentials. So provide a friendly name. I'm going to call it as host login. The source is Hyper-V host cluster, the username and the password, and click on save. If you want to add more credentials, you can add that as well. The next is we are going to add the discovery sources. So click on add discovery source. So this is where we are going to find different machines which is running in this Hyper-V host. So select add a single item. So you have multiple options. You can add multiple items or you can import a CSV as well. So I'm going to put an FQDN because I know the name of the virtual machine. It is called Smart Hotel Host. The credential is host login and I'm going to click on save. Okay, the validation has been successful and it picked up the virtual machine which is in our Hyper-V host. So now we have, if you want to add more virtual machines, you can add more, but I'm not going to do that for this demo. But in your on-prem environment, if you want to add more, you can do that. All right, so now we can start the discovery. So scroll down until you see the start discovery button and hit discovery. So we need to wait for some time until you get a message called discovery has been successfully initiated. This can take up to like 5 to 10 minutes as well. So after the discovery, we can check the discovery status against each host or cluster in the table. All right, so the discovery has been successfully completed. You can see this green tick box. That means it's successfully completed. Now we can go to the Azure portal and we can see the rest of the steps there. So I can click on this link to go to directly to the Azure portal. But since we have the Azure portal opened in the other virtual machine, I'm going to minimize this. And we are going to exit out of this window. Click on Azure Migrate one more time. Click on Server, Database, and Web Apps. And I'm going to hit refresh. So this is the first time we are adding an appliance. So we never had any machines here. So the refreshing has been completed. As you can see now, we have discovered 5 servers. So let me quickly expand the size of the portal. As you can see now, we have 5 discovered servers. So now let me quickly show you how you can download the CSV file of the discovery. All right, so now we have discovered all the virtual machine. The next step is to create an assessment. So let's create an assessment now. So click on this assess button and select Azure Virtual Machine. The assessment type as Azure VM. So you can access Azure SQL, App Service or Azure VMware solution as well. Under Discovery Source, select Servers Discovered from Azure Migrate Appliance. And if you want to fine tune what you're going to assess, click on this edit option under assessment settings. This will give you much more granular options to modify. So we can choose the target location, storage type. If you want to gather information regarding, do you want assessment based on reserved instance, you can select that. You have an option for choosing the virtual machine size based on performance, day, for the percentile of utilization, I'm going to put as 99th. And we have few more pricing tweak as well. So this is where you would be able to give option like, do you want the report based on pay as you go, what currency, what discount do you want to apply, things like that. If you or your customer already have license on the virtual machine server licenses, you can select yes, so that can be omitted from the report. So click on save. The next is select servers to assessment. So instead of Azure Migrate Appliance, because we don't want to discover that, I'm going to select all other server. So in total, I'm going to assess 4 and click on review and create assessment. Oops, I missed a couple of steps. So if you scroll back up, I forgot to give a name for the assessment. I'm going to call it as Smart Hotel Assessment. And I'm going to call the group as Smart Hotel VMs. Once again, click on review to create the assessment. All right, so the assessment is being created. Now, if you go back to the portal, under assessment, it says that nothing is reflecting over here. So all you have to do is click on refresh. All right, so now we can see one group and total assessment 1. So click on that assessment. It opened the assessment in a different panel. And this is the assessment we created, Smart Hotel Assessment. So click on that assessment report. All right, so this is where you get pretty detailed information about the Azure readiness of this server. Out of the 4 servers we selected, you can see that 2 are ready to move into Azure, 2 with some conditions. So if you want to know more detail, you can click on these server and this spits out information about why and what you need to basically do before moving these servers into Azure. These 2 servers are ready, and one, it is mentioning as unknown operating system. It is just a warning, so we can go through this warning report to find out what we have to do before migrating into Azure. Apart from that, you get monthly estimate. So if you move as it is, how much it is going to cost for compute and how much it is going to cost for your storage. Another breakdown of the cost in terms of storage, what is consuming most of the storage, is it your hard disk, what type of hard disk it is, things like that. So this report is pretty self-explanatory and this is really good. Now if you want to have another report, you can, or if you want to tweak further, you can click on edit properties and you can modify this to 1 week. So we just pulled a report based on 1 day's performance. So another one we can get is 1 week's of history. That means you have to run this appliance for a week. The assessment is what you're gonna get next week is based on the week's usage. All right, so now let's go back to the readiness and I want to show you something else. Let's find out what we can do about this unknown virtual machine. So I'm going back into the Azure readiness report. Select the unknown operating system. I'm gonna select this Ubuntu WAF unknown operating system. And this document help us with what are the options for us. So there is a issue type as unknown operating system. It says that the operating system of the VM is specified as other in vCenter server. This behavior blocks Azure Migrate from verifying the Azure readiness of the VM. Make sure that the operating system is supported by Azure before you migrate to the server. So now let's go back to the assessment. Click on this virtual machine. Even though it is an unknown operating system, if you notice, if you use the migration tool to move this to Azure, it is saying that the machine is suitable for lift and shift migration to Azure. That means it is going to work. We just need to make sure that it is supported by Azure. But it is not stopping us from moving this virtual machine to Azure. All right, so that's a pretty good view about the assessment. Let's go back to the discovery again and click on overview. Go under appliance. You can see that we have registered appliance as 1 because we registered. And if you are not seeing any latest details about the appliance, you can always come here and click on refresh services. This basically refresh the whole appliance and the services, and you will get the latest up-to-date information. So in this task, we have created and configured an Azure Migrate migration assessment. In the next task, we are going to create and configure dependency visualization. So let's go back to the Azure Migrate. Click on Server, Databases, and Web Apps. Click on the groups and select the group. So for the dependency to work, we need to install the agent. So I'm going to select require agent installation on this virtual machine. That is going to open another window where it is going to tell you have to configure OMS workspace for this to work. Click on that. Create a new workspace because we don't have one running at the moment, and select a location and hit configure. So right now it is deploying the workspace for you. So we need to wait at least like 10 seconds or 20 seconds for the workspace to be created. All right, so the workspace is created. You can click on this workspace. As you can see, the log analytics workspace for that is created. Let's go back to the dependencies. Scroll down. This is where you will be able to find the agent workspace ID and the key which is required to install it on the virtual machine. So I'm going to copy the workspace key right now, and I'm going to keep it in the notepad and go back under the workspace. Under agent management, you will be able to see the workspace ID and the primary key. So this is what we copied there, but I just want to make sure that you know where else you can get this information. Go back under dependencies. Since our virtual machine is a Windows 64-bit virtual machine, I'm gonna right click and copy the link address so that we can go back to the virtual machine and install it there. Now let's go back into our on-prem environment. This time open the Hyper-V. Alright, so we can install it on the Smart Hotel Web 1. So double tap, provide the password for the administrator, and log into our web server. Alright, so I'm gonna go to Internet Explorer and paste the link we just copied so that we can download the agent so that we can create the dependency mapping, and hit run. So right now it is installing the dependency mapping agent. So this is going to allow us to map all the dependencies of this particular server on our next assessment. Make sure that you agree to the terms and condition, and this time select to connect the agent to Azure Log Analytics, which is OMS, and click next. So we have already copied the workspace ID. So I'm going to quickly resize it so that I can copy the workspace ID and the workspace key, and click next and install. Alright, so now that we have installed the Microsoft monitoring agent, let's see if it is installed properly. So go to your server and click on Programs and Features and see if you have installed the Microsoft monitoring agent. We use the workspace to connect to our Azure subscription. The next task, what we are going to do is we are going to download the dependency agent. So we install the MMA agent. Next step is to download the dependency agent. So I'm going to copy the link, get back to my on-prem environment, go to your browser and put the installation link and hit enter. Alright, so it is downloaded the dependency agent right now for Windows. So make sure you download the appropriate software for each machine. So I click on agree and I finish the installation. So this step has been completed and it is installed on Web Application 1. So we do have a couple of other machines as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to install it on Web 2 and SQL 1. So let's go and connect the Web 2. Alright, so I'm installing the MMA client on Web 2 right now. So now that is completed, I'm going to now install the dependency agent. So the dependency agent is successfully completed. Now I'm going to repeat the process in the SQL server as well. Make sure you select Connect Agent to Log Analytics, click Next, and provide the workspace ID and workspace key to complete the installation. Finish, and let's continue the process of installing the dependency agent. So in the on-prem environment, if you want to get dependency mapping of all the servers on how it is interacting with other servers, what are the dependency you want to analyze on these services, make sure to install both of these agents on all of these servers, including your Linux machines. All right, so the dependency agent and MMA agent is being installed on all three Windows machines. So we have installed it on SQL database, a web server 1 and web server 2. The next step is to install it on the Ubuntu web application firewall machine. So let us use our host machine, which is our smart hotel host machine, to connect to the Ubuntu WAF remotely using the SSH session. So let's use the command prompt to connect to the Ubuntu server. So type in SSH demo user at the IP address of the server. Type yes to continue the connection. And now let's provide the password. All right, let's provide the password one more time. Great. So it looks like it is connected. Now let's type in sudo -s. This gives the terminal session elevated privileges. And provide the password one more time. All right, so now we got the root access. Now we have to enter this command into the terminal. But before that, we have to replace the value for the workplace ID and workplace key. And before that, we have to replace the value here on the workspace ID and the workspace key. All right, so let me go back to the Azure portal and fetch those details before we enter here. So I'm going to resize our host. Let's go and copy the workspace ID first and replace this with the workspace ID. And repeat the process to replace the ID for the workspace key as well. So I'm going to copy the workspace key, go back to the environment and replace this placeholder with the workspace key. All right, so now we have everything what we need to install this agent. So I'm going to copy everything, go back to the terminal where we have the elevated access, and I'm going to run it. As you can see that it is now installing the package. So looks like our server is being rebooted. We have to wait for a little more time to. All right, looks like the service is being restarted properly and it is installing the required components. We just need to wait for this installation to complete. Looks like it is completed. Now we have to execute one more command, this time to install the OMS agent. What I'm going to do is I'm going to replace the workspace ID, which I have copied earlier. I'm going to copy the workspace ID. Make sure you don't make any mistakes while you're copying these IDs. Don't confuse it with workspace key when you try to copy the workspace ID. And let's run that. Next step is to run the dependency agent. This download script will install the dependency agent. So let's execute that and install the agent. As you can see that the dependency agent installation was successful. So that was a long task. So all the agent installation has been completed. So we have installed the agent on the SQL server, web application 1, web application 2, and our WAF server. So in the next task, we are going to explore the dependency visualization. All the dependency agent and the monitoring agent on the hotel virtual machine, both on Windows and Linux virtual machine. Let me take you to the Azure Migrate and show you where you can find the dependency visualization and what are the modifications you can do there. So let's go to your Azure Migrate, click on server databases and web apps, click on dependency analysis and click on the groups and select the group. As you can see that now instead of required to install this agent, we have this dependency agent installed on all of these three virtual machines. Now to view the dependencies, click on view dependencies on the top ribbon. So far we don't have any information yet because it is still collecting the information from these servers. So you can come to this particular page to gain more insight into your dependencies. You can modify the duration, the date and time and things like that. And we will come back to this page later after it collect enough dependencies so that I can show you how you can actually see details about these connected services and servers. All right, so now we have completed that in the next task, we are going to do an actual migration. So we are going to migrate the application and web tiers using the Azure Migrate server migration. All right, to initiate the migration, the first task we are going to do is we are going to create a new storage account, which is Azure storage account that will be used by Azure Migrate server migration for storage of your virtual machine data during migration. So let's click on create a resource and type in storage account and select storage account and click on create. Let's keep the default selection on subscription and the resource group. We are going to retain it to Azure Migrate resource group itself. Give a name to your storage account. The name has to be a unique name and pick a region. So I'm going to keep East US because most of our resources are placed in East US. Under performance, I'm going to retain the standard, which is a general purpose V2 account. And redundancy, I'm going to change it to LRS, which is locally redundant storage, which will give me 3 copies in the same data center or a same region. I'm not going to do any modification on the advanced tab or the networking tab, but click on data protection. Under data protection, make sure you uncheck enable soft delete for blobs. If you want to retain, so I'm going to uncheck it because I don't want to enable the soft delete blobs. But if you do want to retain a copy for certain number of days, you can enable that and click on review plus create. It is running the validation. The validation is being passed and you can now click on create. The storage account creation won't take more than like 30 seconds. While that is happening, let's go and create a private endpoint. So in this task, we are going to create an endpoint on the provided virtual network that will be used by the SQL Server resource. So let's go to the resource group where all of our cloud resources are placed. And let's try to find the SQL Server. Click on the SQL Server. On the left hand side, scroll down until you find security. Under security, click on private endpoint connections. We don't have any private endpoints at the moment, so click on create a new private endpoint. So retain the default selection on subscription and resource group. Give a name for your private endpoint instance. I'm going to call it as Smart Hotel DB endpoint and retain the region as same as your other resources, which is East US for me. Click next to go to the resource. Make sure your resource type is Microsoft SQL servers and your resource is the resource name for your server and your target sub resource is SQL server. Click next. So to deploy the private endpoint, we need to select a VNet. I'm going to select the hotel VNet and the subnet which is associated to that VNet, and make sure that select the integrate with private DNS zone. Alright, under virtual network, make sure you select a subnet which is /25 and click next and click on review and create. After the validation is being passed, click on create. Alright, your deployment is now complete. Just click on go to resource and under settings, click on DNS configuration. If you scroll down under configuration name, you can see that there is a private DNS zone created. So click on that. Alright, so here you go. You have all the information for your private DNS for your database server. So the private DNS is used so that the database domain name, which is database.windows.net, resolves to the internal private endpoint IP address. So this is the internal private endpoint private IP address, which will be resolved from smart home, which will be resolved from our smart hotel VNet, but resolves to the internet facing IP address of the database server when resolved from outside the VNet. This means that the same connection string can be used in both the cases. Alright, so in the next task, we are going to register our Hyper-V host VM with the Azure Migrate server migration. You need to understand that the service uses Azure Site Recovery as the underlying migration engine. So let's go to your Azure Migrate. Click on servers, databases, and web apps. Instead of the assessment tool, now you have to scroll down to the new tab, which is called the migration tools. This is what I talked about. So within this, the internal or underlying tool which Microsoft uses is Azure Site Recovery. So click on Discover. Here, the first question is, are your machines virtualized? Yes, we know that our environment is virtualized with Hyper-V. So the environment we are talking about is this environment. So we have 4 servers running in this environment. Our web application 1 and 2 and our Linux machine and our SQL database as well. So this is the environment we are talking about. And the target region, we have to select the same region. So that is East US. Under the target region, we have to select East US because that is where all of our resources are residing. And click on confirm that the target region for migration is the region which you chose. And click on create resources. Alright, so the deployment is completed. Now we have to download this and install it in our Hyper-V host. So I'm just going to copy the link and let's go back to our on-prem environment. Go to the browser and paste the link to download the agent. I'm going to first save the agent and run it. The agent what we are installing is Azure Site Recovery Provider agent. So now let's go back to our Azure portal, and this time we need the registration key to connect our on-prem environment with this particular Azure Migrate project. So I'm going to download the key. Right, let's look at the file we just downloaded, and I'm going to copy it and I'm going to paste it on the desktop on our on-prem environment. Okay, now let's complete the installation on the on-prem server. So I'm going to keep the default for Windows Update. Click Next. Install the installation provider. And during the installation, it is going to ask you for the key. That is where we are going to provide the key we just downloaded. All right, it looks like it is about to finish the installation of the agent. All right, so the installation of the agent is completed and installation of Azure's Site Recovery Provider is also completed. Now next process is to register it. So click on register and make sure that you point to the place where you just downloaded the keys. So I've placed the key onto the desktop. So click on open. So now we have the keys, the subscription detail, the vault where the information is going to go to, and information of your Hyper-V site name as well. So click next. Make sure you select connect directly to the Azure Site Recovery without a proxy server and click next. So in this stage, the agent is now configuring your Azure Site Recovery for registration. Successfully registered with the Azure Site Recovery Vault. So click on finish. So now let's go back to the Azure portal and we have to finalize the registration. So it should show as one connected virtual machine. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to quickly refresh the page and hope that it picks up the registration what we have just completed. I'm going to go through the process one more time. Yep, it looks like now it's showing that one server is connected, and click on finalize the registration. As you can see that after finalizing the registration and completing the virtual machine discovery, you can start replicating virtual machines, and it usually takes 10 to 15 minutes to complete the finalization. So please be patient. Alright, so looks like our deployment is being completed and the registration is finalized. Now let's go back to the Azure portal and go to Azure Migrate. Click on servers, databases, and web apps. Scroll down to your migration tools. As you can see that you have 5 discovered servers. Now, since we have completed the discovery, what we are going to do is we are going to replicate these servers into Azure. Alright, so the first step is So under basic, select yes with Hyper-V because our environment is virtualized with Hyper-V. Click next for virtual machine. Um, Under import migration settings from an assessment, yes, select that yes, apply migration settings from an Azure Migrate assessment. So if you remember, we have created a group and we have created an assessment as well. So pick and select both. And under that, you can see that all three of our virtual machines are listed. So I'm going to select all three virtual machine, including a Linux machine. Even though it is showing as unknown operating system, I have shown a report in the previous steps that this is still fine. It's just that Microsoft not able to identify the type of the operating system running on this virtual machine because it's a custom OS, but you can still lift and shift and this virtual machine will work in Azure. After selecting all of the virtual machines, click next. So select your subscription and under resource group, I'm going to select the host resource group, which we already have. We have created a storage account for this. So I'm going to select that storage account. Under the virtual network, we're going to select the smart hotel host VNet. Because this is a lab environment, I don't want to select any availability option, but in the real world, you would either choose availability set or availability zone. If you want to leverage the Azure hybrid usage benefit, you can select yes or no based on your license. Click next. So in the compute tab, we're going to select standard F2S version 2, which has 2 core and 4 GB RAM for all three virtual machines. And make sure you select the appropriate operating system so that the system identifies it. So we know that our Web 1 and Web 2 are Windows and the Ubuntu is a Linux virtual machine. And click next. So under the disk tab, please review the settings and do not make any changes. And do not make any changes unless you really want to do any changes. Click next. If you do want to provide tags, you can provide that. Click next and click on replicate. So now it started the replication process. Now if we go back to the Azure Migrate and go back to server databases and web apps, scroll down until you see the migration tools. This time click on overview. Here you can see that there are 3 machines which are now being replicated into Azure. So now if you want to see the replication status, all you have to do is click on replicating machine under manage and hit refresh to get the latest stages. All right, so the status what we are looking here is right now it is being synchronized. Until we get the status as protected, this is not completely replicated. So we have to wait for at least 10 to 15 minutes to make sure that the replication is completed and the status will change to protected. Again, it is saying that it is 0% synchronized. So we need to get some more time for this replication to complete. All right, so it took me quite some time to get this replicated. So as you can see that now our status is being changed from synchronizing to protected. Now all 3 of these virtual machines are replicated into Azure. So in this task, we are going to configure the static IP address for each of these virtual machine. So within this Azure Migrate server migration itself, on the left hand side, make sure that you are inside the manage replicating machines. Select each virtual machine. Within that, you can click on compute and network. This is where you would be able to modify any of these compute properties. So click edit. If you like to change the size of the virtual machine or the disk type, you can modify it here. So what we are going to do is we're going to change the IP address from dynamic to static. So come to the network interfaces and click on internal NAT switch and change the private IP address to, instead of dynamic, type in a static IP address. I'm going to give it as 192.168.0.4. I'm going to copy it so that I can give Click OK and go to the main page and click on Save. Similarly, we are going to perform this on all other virtual machines. So select Smart Hotel Web 2, click on Compute and Network, Edit, scroll down until you find internal NAT switch. Instead of dynamic, this VM, we are going to call it this VM, we are going to give an IP address of 192.168.0.5. Click OK, go back and save. Next one is the Ubuntu Linux virtual machine. Select the virtual machine, go to Computer Network, Edit, Internal Network Switch, change it to 192.168.0.6. Click OK and save. Alright, so we successfully modified the IP address of all of these replicated VM to use a static private IP address that matches the on-prem IP address for that machine. Now, in this task, we are going to perform server migration. In the real world, before the actual migration, you would do a test migration. But in this scenario, we are going to do an actual migration. So let's go to Azure Migrate. Under the migration tools, click on Overview and just do a refresh to make sure all the recent changes are being replicated. And scroll down to step 3. This is where you have an option to migrate it to Azure. So click on Migrate. So if you want to selectively migrate each virtual machine, you can pick one by one. In our case, we are going to select all 3 virtual machine and click on. So before clicking on Migrate, you have an option to shut down machines before migration to minimize the data loss. If you don't want to shut down, you can press no, but I'm just going to click yes. So shutdown is fine. And click Migrate. So right now, as you can see that the migration is being in progress. If you want to see the status, all you have to do is go to Jobs. So go under Manage, click on Jobs. This is where you can see that there are 3 planned failovers are in progress. Each of the virtual machines are listed over here, the Ubuntu, the Web Application 1 and the Web Application 2. So we need to wait until the planned failover job to show as status of successful to proceed further. And this process also, it would take around 15 minutes to complete. Okay, all right. So looks like all of our failover has been completed. You can see the status of all 3 virtual machine is completed. Now let's go back to our Azure portal. Go to Home or go to Resource Groups. The resource group we chose was to move all the failover machine to Smart Hotel Resource Group. Select that. And we need to make sure that we can see all the virtual machine is migrated to this resource group. So I'm just going to sort it by type. Scroll until you see the virtual machines first. All right, so I can see the virtual machine Ubuntu, WAF, Smart Hotel Web Application 1 and Web Application 2. All 3 of these virtual machines are migrated successfully. We can even find the disk for these virtual machines. So if you scroll up, yep, the disk for all 3 virtual machines also been moved. And if you want to find the network interface, because we have created static IP for all 3, you can see the network IP. You can see the network interface for all of these 3 virtual machine also moved as well, or created rather. All right, so we completed the migration of the server. In the next task, what we are going to do is we are going to do a database migration. So we still have an application, which is the 3rd server. What we are going to do is we are going to migrate the application database. All right, so let's start a new exercise. In this exercise, we are going to migrate the application database from the on-premises Hyper-V virtual machine to a new database hosted in the Azure SQL Database Service. And we are going to use the Azure Database Migration Service to complete the migration, which uses the Microsoft Data Migration Assistant for the database assessment and schema migration phases. So let's get into it. The first task is to register the Microsoft Data Migration Resource Provider. For that, we are going to use the Cloud Shell. So click on the Cloud Shell on the top ribbon over here and select PowerShell. Because this is the first time we are using this service, select the subscription and create storage. All right, the Cloud Shell is getting ready. So to register the Microsoft Data Migration Resource Provider, we have to run a command and click enter to execute. All right, so that is successfully completed. And if you want to check the status, you can run this command to check the status. As you can see that the registration status is returned as registered for all of these locations and services. All right, so now that is been completed. Let's close this window and head back to Azure portal. What we are going to do is we are going to select the Azure Data Migration Service. So go to click on Create Resource. Type in Azure Database Migration Service. Select the first one and click on Create. So we have a couple of options here. First one is use Azure Data Studio to migrate or continue to use Azure Database Migration Service. So we are going to select Azure Database Migration Service. And in the details, you can see the target migration scenarios which is supported here. From SQL, PostgreSQL, MySQL, AWS RDS, MongoDB, you can move to any of these target resources. Click on Select. All right, so we already created a resource group for all the migration, which we moved our virtual machines. I'm going to use the same resource group for database migration as well. So select the Azure Migration Resource Group. The service name, I'm going to give it as Smart Hotel DB Migration. I'm going to retain the location as East US because that is where most of our workloads are running. Under service mode, I'm going to choose Azure, not hybrid. And tier, I'm going to keep the existing default tier here. If you have to change it, you can click on configure tier and you can change the tier to whatever you like. Next, click on networking. Under the networking tab, select the DMS VNet/data migration service and click on review and create. After the validation, click on create. The deployment is in progress right now, and creating a new migration service can take around 20 minutes. Because this is going to take 20 minutes, we can go to the next task and we can come back to this later. The next task what I have in mind is to go and access the on-premises database using Data Migration Assistant. So in this task, we are going to install and use Microsoft Data Migration Assistant, which is known as DMA, to access the on-prem database. So let's go back to the main homepage of Azure. Go inside Azure Migrate. This time on the Getting Started page, just scroll down until you find database only. So all of our previous exercise has been completed within the server, databases and web apps. This time I'm going to use databases only and click on access and migrate databases. Under the assessment tools, click on this link over here to add an assessment tool. So we have a couple of options, Azure Migrate and Unify Cloud. So I'm going to select Azure Migrate for this exercise and click on add tool. All right, so under the assessment tools, scroll down till you find migration tool. Because we don't have a migration tool yet, click on this link here to add a migration tool. Here we are going to use Azure Migrate Database Migration and click on add tool. All right, so now we have an assessment tool and migration tool ready to go. The first one is Data Migration Assistant and the second one is Data Migration Service. Now under assessment tools, click on assess. So we have to download this data migration assessment tool. So I'm not going to download on this local machine. I'm going to right click and I'm going to copy the link address. So we're going to download it in our on-prem virtual machine. Let's go to our on-prem environment and paste the link in the browser and scroll down until you find this download button. So click on download now. Alright, so the data migration assistant is downloaded. Click on it to execute the installation process. It looks like we need to have .NET Framework 4.8. So I'm going to download that first and click on download .NET Framework 4.8 and execute the installation and execute the installer. Alright, so currently the installation is in progress for .NET Framework 4.8. Framework is complete. Now we can go ahead and install the Microsoft Data Migration Assistant. Oh, before that, let me quickly restart the machine. So to log back into our on-prem environment, we have hosted that under Smart Hotel Resource Group Host Resource Group. This is where we hosted this under. Let's find our virtual machine. Our virtual machine is called Smart Hotel Host. While this is restarting, let's download the RDP file and make sure that we select the IP address as DNS name and download the RDP file. Let's try to connect now. Alright, so now we are back into the system. Let's go to the download folder where we actually downloaded the DMA file. So this is what we have downloaded, which is called Data Migration Assistant. I'm going to double click and install that. Cool. Click on Launch Microsoft Data Migration Assistant. I'm just going to close all other window because that is not required. Oh, by the way, let me quickly open the Hyper-V Manager because we will have to connect to our database server. Yeah, we will have to connect to this server, which is Smart Hotel SQL1. This is where our on-prem SQL database is running. So we will come back to the server later. Let's go back to performing a couple more other activities. So first, let's go to the Explorer, go to the Data Migration Assistant folder and right-click the dma.exe.config and open with a notepad. So what we are trying to look here is we are looking for an Azure Migrate and we are going to remove the around line settings and enable assessment upload to Azure Migrate key. So let's do a quick find. Azure Migrate. So just remove these brackets from the beginning and in the end as well. All right, and now let's save the file and close it. Now let's relaunch the Microsoft Data Migration Assistant and click on Start New. So what we are going to do right now is first assessment and then migration. So give a name for your project. I'm going to call it as Smart Hotel Assessment. Assessment type, database engine. Source server type as SQL Server. And target server type as Azure SQL Database. And click on Create. During the assessment, we are going to check the database compatibility and we are going to check feature parity as well. So click on Next. So this is where we have to give the server name or the IP address. So let's go to the server and find out what's the IP address. Open the command prompt and type in ipconfig. So the address is 192.168.0.6. So minimize it. Provide that value as the server name. In the authentication space, we are going to select, instead of Windows authentication, we are going to select SQL Server authentication. And the username is whatever your database username and password. And during the connection, please make sure you click on Encrypt Connection as well as Trust Server Certificate and click on Connect. All right, so the connection is established. Let's select the server and we can find the database as well, Smart Hotel Registration. Next, click on Add. So you can see that the assessment has not been done. So to start the assessment, click on Start Assessment. All right, so the assessment is completed. We can see that there is one unsupported feature, which is not a big deal for us, which is SQL Server Broker. And what is the recommendation for that? If you are going to use this particular service, what can you do when you do the migration? All right, so now the assessment is complete. We don't have any big problems, so we can click on Upload to Azure Migrate. So by default, your Azure option will come. So in our case, we are using the regular Azure. So select Azure and click on Connect. Provide the username and password for your Azure subscription and click Sign In. So right now this is checking with your Azure subscription to see if there is any live or active Azure Migrate project enabled. And once it identifies that, you will be able to make connections with your Azure subscription and your Azure Migrate project as well. You remember we created an Azure Migrate project for this, which is called as Smart Hotel Migration. It is taking more time than expected. Let me do one more time. I'm going to try one more time. Click on connect, select the account. All right, so it picked up now. So the subscription we have to select is our Azure Pass subscription, and the migration project which I talked about is the Smart Hotel Migration we created earlier. So click on upload. All right, so the assessment is being uploaded. Click OK. So now let's go back to our Azure environment. I'm going to go back to my Azure portal and go to databases and click on refresh. So right now we don't have any assessment report here. We should see some assessment report immediately popping up here after completing this refresh cycle. All right, so the refresh is completed. Now you can see that we have assessed database instances, assessed databases. A database is ready to move for Azure SQL or Azure SQL Virtual Machine. So in this task, we have used Data Migration Assistant to assess an on-premises database for readiness to migrate to Azure SQL and uploaded the assessment result to your Azure Migrate project. All right, so let's quickly check what happened to our DMS service. All right, so the DMS service is also deployed. So click on Go to Resource. I can see that your database migration service is successfully created. Now let's use this to create a new project. So now let's go back to Azure Resources. I'm going to go to my resources, and this time I want to select my SQL server. So let me sort it out by type. All right. So my SQL server is known as Smart Hotel SQL GGJXC. Select that. Let me give you a quick idea on what we are going to do now. So in this task, we are going to create a migration project with Azure Database Migration Service, not the assistant. What we have seen before is using the assistant tool. This is an Azure service by itself. All right, so let's go into our SQL server, and what we're going to do now is we are going to create a new private endpoint connection. So let's go under security and click on private endpoint connection. And in the previous example, we created one. This time we're going to create a new one. So click on private endpoint. So retain the default information what it is over here. So we're going to retain the same resource group. This time name the instance as Smart Hotel DB for databases. Okay, Smart Hotel DB for DMS. And I'm going to pick the region as East US because that's where most of our resources are. And click on resource. This is all good. Click on network. Under the virtual network, I'm going to select DMS VNet, which we have already provisioned before, and select the subnet which is part of it. And make sure you select the integrate with private DNS zone to S, and select the resource group. So I'm going to change it to our local resource group and retain to new private link .database.windows.net. Click next. If you want to provide a tag, you can provide over here. Otherwise, click review or create and click on create. All right, so the deployment is completed. Click on go to resource. So under settings, click on DNS configuration. All right, so now let's look at the private DNS we just created. So this is what we just created. Please note that the private DNS is used so that the database domain name, which is .database.windows.net, resolves to the internal private endpoint IP address, which is 10.1.0.5 when resolved from the DMS VNet. Now let's go back to the database server blade and scroll down under security. This time click on firewalls and virtual networks, and make sure that if this is checked box, if this is checked, please uncheck it. Now let's go back to our resource group. You remember we created a database migration service resource. Let's go and find that resource. So click on the resource group we selected to create that resource. What I'm trying to find is the database migration service resource. Oh, all right. So I think I created this resource under Azure Migrate resource group. So let's go to the Azure Migrate resource group and sort it by type. So this is the resource we created, which is Azure Database Migration Service. Select that. So we don't have any migration project now. So now in this exercise or a task, we are going to use Azure Database Migration Service to do a migration. So click on New Migration Project. Give a name for the project. I'm going to call it as DB Migrate. I'm going to retain the source as SQL Server and target as Azure SQL Database. And the migration activity type, change it to create new project or create project only, and click on create. So I know that our SQL source instance is 10.0.0.4. I'm going to put that IP address. Authentication as SQL authentication instead of Windows authentication. Username SA and the password for my database. So I'm going to check encrypt connection and I'm going to check the trust server certificate and then click on select databases. All right, so that picked up the database what we have on the source server. And now click on select target. Here on the target server, so let's find out our database target server name. So I'm going to go back to my resource group, select the resource group. We are trying to find the SQL server and copy the server name. And let's go back to the other Azure portal and put that details over here. And once again, the authentication type to SQL authentication name is demo user and provide the password. And make sure to leave the encrypt connection on. Click next for summary and click on save project. All right, so now let's click on refresh to see if we can see our project. All right, so now that is completed. Now let's go and migrate the database schema. So for that, click on new activity and instead of data migration, click on schema only migration. Keep the SQL source SQL instance name as 0.4. We know that that is correct. And all we have to do is enter the password and click on select target. Once again, our target is already laid out. Again, we will only have to provide the password and click on select database schema. All right, so under the target database, select the target database and schema source as generate from source and click on summary. All right, so that is completed. So all that is left right now is to provide the activity name. So I'm going to call it as schema migration. And to start the migration, click on start migration. All right, so the migration must be happening right now. So if you want to check the latest status, so as you can see, the status is running. If you want to check what is the recent status, all you have to do is hit the refresh button. So let's wait for some time to complete this migration. All right, so our schema migration is completed. So you have completed this task. So the next task is we are going to use the Azure Database Migration Service to migrate the database data to Azure SQL Database. So what we have done just now is schema migration. What we are going to do right now is to do data migration. Database data migration. So let's go back to the Database Migration Service, select the project, and this time instead of schema migration, select data migration. Once again, all the details are automatically populated because we created this project. So just provide the password and click next to select the databases. Our database is selected automatically. Click on select the target. Here also the data is populated. Provide the password and click next to map to target databases. All right, so you can see that the database is selected and the size of the database is 16 MB. Let's choose the target database and click on configure migration settings, expand and only select the database We don't need the migration history. And click on next for the summary. Create a name for the activity. I'm going to call it as data migration and click on start migration. Just like how we waited for the schema migration, wait for some time to complete the database migration. Let's hit refresh to see what's the status like. All right, so that is completed as well. The size of the new database is 2.8 MB. All right, so the database migration task also been completed. So we have used the data migration assistant and data migration service to migrate the database data from the on-premises SQL Server database to Azure SQL database.